As we begin our analysis, the first step in our process is going to be identifying relative precedent transactions. And as we know, precedent transactions are only useful for evaluation if they are truly comparable companies that were sold in recent M&A deals. So what we're really starting here on this slide is the wide filter that we begin with, how we pull a robust database of precedents, and then from there we're going to start weeding things out and selecting only the most relevant. So this is the widest stage of the filter here, and I want to cover a number of data sources that you guys are likely to use and just walk through some considerations and merits around each source. So the first source, and I'd say the most valuable, if you can dig up anything from here, would be fairness opinions from comps. And as you guys know, fairness opinions are just merger proxies for past transactions. These are documents made by investment bankers. It's sort of a statement of value and a statement of fairness around the value being offered for the business. And it's kind of a legal check the box item for existing shareholders to know, are they getting a relatively fair value for their business based on the known methods of valuation out there. So within these fairness opinions, oftentimes the bankers will have already cherry picked a number of relevant precedent transactions. And so by sort of the law of transitivity, if you've already found a good comp, you can kind of surmise that if the precedents were good enough for that comp, they're probably going to be good enough for your target. So if you can start with the fairness opinion and get enough data out of this typically will provide the most robust amount of data and the most relevant precedent transactions. But if that doesn't work or you feel like you need more, the next source that we can move on to is third-party deal screening tools. So these can include things like Bloomberg, FactSet, CapIQ, SNL, Thomson. There's many resources out there where you can set key criteria of the type of transaction you are trying to find, and it's going to spit out a lot of transactions for you. I'd say this is a pretty exhaustive approach when you begin with this, but nonetheless, it can be a nice starting point. You're going to have to whittle things down from there. Now, one other thing I do think worth noting about this is that oftentimes when you run these deal screens, these resources will list some sort of transaction data and they'll list some financial metrics around it, but usually you want to fact check those. Usually I have found that they're not the best on accuracy necessarily. If it's really, really large transactions, usually they get it right. But if they're smaller kind of niche transactions, then a lot of times the financial data can be pretty murky, and that's something that you oftentimes want to vet. So it's critical to cross-reference third-party resources with your actual SEC filings and press releases around any of these transactions. Now, the last resource, and I'd say our kind of last line of defense here, is just going to colleagues or, potentially clients, if possible, who probably have a very good knowledge of the space. So any of these resources may have insights into which deals are relevant and which comps are truly comparable. And so this kind of gets to the art of things. On the science end, you can pull all the financial data you want and you can pull all the public info you want. But at the end of the day, insiders, industry specialists are going to have a much more nuanced view of what's a true fit and what are outliers or what shouldn't be counted. And furthermore, another benefit of this is it may be able to save you a lot of effort, as your colleagues or clients or other resources out there may already have a comp set from a prior project. And sometimes I've had experiences where I can just rip someone else's comp set. Maybe you have to run a screen to find relatively recent deals if their comp set was run a year or two ago, but that's much less arduous than having to go back 5 years, a decade, however long your time frame is, to pull a robust set of comps. Now, one last thing I want to mention is that if all else fails, and this largely applies to our kind of third-party deal screens when you're trying to dig up relevant precedents, if all else fails, you can use NAICS or CIS code-based screens and filter for deals where the target has the same code. So these are codes you can dig up from these websites that we have here, whether it's Census or the SEC. They're industry identifiers, so whatever industry your target's in, you could run screens using codes that the same code is what your target is based in. But I'd really view this as kind of one of the last lines of defense. If you have more refined filters that you can run, that's usually better. Usually these just running off these codes is going to spit out a large set of comps or a large set of precedent transactions, and it's going to be pretty unwieldy to filter through all those transactions. But this certainly is an option out there.